Okay, so tell me more about yourself, a little bit about yourself, I should say, and how you got involved in the disability community.
Yeah, so my name is Corey Briskey. I have a background in psychology. My undergrad is in psychology, and I have a graduate degree in public health. And so, kind of, I had an idea in my head that I always wanted to help people. So I thought you could help a lot of people if you go into public health. And so that's kind of what I was doing for a little while until I had my second child. And life, of course, knocks you off course, even though you think you got your path planned. And so he was 2 months premature. And as far as preemies, the age of preemies go, it wasn't that early. There weren't that many issues. It really was about just learning to grow in the hospital, learning to feed on his own and to breathe on his own and to maintain his own temperature. And so it kind of felt like that was the mountain that we had to climb. And so my son spent about 6 weeks in the special infant care clinic. And once he passed his car seat test, he was ready to go. We kind of left and we're like, okay, we have a couple doctor referrals and then we'll just be back on track. And then over the course of the next 6 months to a year, um, my son just really never met any of his milestones. And so every doctor's appointment kind of felt like there was a little bit more pressure. We came out with more referrals for GI or vision or other therapies. And he had issues like torticollis, so I took it on my own account to take him to a chiropractor. And so by the time he was a year old, we were going to, 5, 6 appointments a week. I had taken my 3 months leave of absence, and that turned into 6 months, and then that turned into 9 months. And then I was like, well, I can't work anymore. My child's care is just too complicated. He didn't have a diagnosis. So all the doctors kept saying when I would ask is, um, there's a chance he could catch up. So just keep being really diligent about that therapy, do what the therapists do. And then when we're in the sessions with my son's therapy, they're like showing me all the tasks that they do and how they do it. And they're like, you got to keep doing this, you know, all the time, even when we're not here. And so that I hyper focus on that. And so for years, that's what I did to try to catch him up because there was no definitive. It was just global developmental delay. There was nothing definitive. Um, it wasn't until my son was 3.5 that he started having seizures. And that's when I realized that things weren't going to change. I had like separated myself from the disability crowd. And now all of a sudden I was like, my child's disabled. He's really been disabled all along and I didn't know it. And then that was the point I was like really accepting and understanding of, okay, like now, just because my child has therapy doesn't mean he's going to catch up. Things aren't going to get better. Things aren't going to be perfect. Like, how can I reframe my mind around that? And so we kind of stepped back on therapies a little bit, but I was still, I still wanted him to get to certain points. And so I still practiced some of that therapy with him. It really was another 1.5 years until he was diagnosed as autistic. And that's when I felt like a huge amount of pressure that had already been put on me for years kind of just toppled in because they wanted me to do behavioral therapy, which is 20 to 40 hours a week. And so I realized there was so much pressure to kind of fix my child and for me to fix my child and me to get him all his help. And then for him, so it's 2 layers pressure on me, right? That trickles down to my child. And there wasn't enough support for me to do it all. And so that's when I also began to kind of learn more about the neurodiversity movement and realize how unnecessary some of this pressure is that we were putting on our kids and on my child to fit a mold that he was really never meant to fit. And so that's kind of how I became really involved in the disability community.
Mm-hmm. My next question is, what sorts of work do you do in the disability community?
So right now I'm on the board of directors for a nonprofit called Their Friends Community Partnership. And it's a really awesome nonprofit organization that focuses on providing neurodiversity affirming therapy to children and training, facilities and organizations on how to be inclusive and kind of what neurodiversity affirming means, which really just means there's just differences, respecting the differences in the way each child learns, and kind of just following their lead and the way their brain works and appreciating that. So I got involved with their friends after maybe a year or maybe 6 months after my son was diagnosed as autistic, because that's when I was really understanding the type of therapy that would have been better for him, and understanding that some of the tactics of therapy, like hand over hand, were more damaging than good. And so it was when I was kind of learning a lot myself, and then I wanted to start helping other families understand the importance of really good neurodiversity affirming therapy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have interviewed one of the co-founders or co-directors of TheraFriends Community Partners. So yeah, I'm aware of that organization.
Yeah, they're really awesome.
Mm-hmm. My next question is, like you are also in the process of writing a memoir. Correct me if I'm wrong. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so it was a little over a year ago. It was in the summer, and the kids had childcare. It was the first summer we had childcare and consistent coverage. So I was feeling like I had a little more time on my hands. And I was talking and catching up with a friend who was talking about writing a book. And she said, "Oh, she should write a book." And something in my brain just was triggered. And I was like, I should write a book. And so I sat down. I only had a few minutes, but I sat down and I wrote, exactly what came to my mind. And what came to my mind was kind of like the lowest point of you know, my personal experience of raising a disabled child. And that kind of became my prologue. And once I wrote that, I knew there was no stopping. It felt like the book was already written for me. And so it took about 7 or 8 months to get a draft. And after that was drafted, I had some friends, family, and strangers read my book and give me feedback. And so after I got some of that feedback, they're called beta readers, I made some edits to the book. And after that, I actually hired an editor to give me a developmental edit. So some feedback on plot, structure, character, if there's anything missing, if anything can be worked better, structured better. So then I kind of went through and redrafted that. And so it was another 3 or 4 months before I had a really good draft that I am now beginning to use to query agents. So I've stepped from writing the book to actually marketing it to agents, or it's called querying. So I write a letter and I send it to agents, and if they like it, they can put a proposal together for you, and then they can pitch it to publishers. And so that route is called traditional publishing. And so I'm going to try to work on traditionally publishing my memoir. And if it doesn't work out, there's always alternative paths like self-publishing. Just in general, the memoir is called, the working title is called What Village? Overcoming Ableism and Reclaiming Motherhood. So it's kind of what I talked about in 300 pages. So I'm really excited because I can't, either way it's going to come out to the world. It doesn't matter what channel it goes through. I'm just really excited to share it with everyone.
Mm-hmm. And I know it's not on my list of questions, but is it like, what's the status of that? Are you almost done with it? Is it about to be published?
Yeah, so the process, it really does take a long time. If, let's say, I got a traditional publisher to accept it and I signed a contract with them today, it could still take 1.5 to 2 years to go through all its edits, to go through its graphic design, to maybe rework a new title, for me to make edits, for the editor to make edits, and then for it to come out into the world. So it is a long process. If I self-publish, which I wouldn't decide to do quite yet, it could take 6 months to a year just to like get everything together on my own as well. So I wouldn't expect it out really, really soon, but hopefully I'll be able to make some decisions and announcements on what path I'm taking, and within the next 6 to 8 months or so.
Mm-hmm. Okay, moving on, like, how does writing a memoir, being an advocate in the disability community and writing a blog about disability related issues, raise awareness towards, advocating for change?
Um, it really just sheds light on the experiences that our families are living through every day. Because you don't really know until you know. And so I think it's important to talk about what it is that we go through on a regular basis, and how to um, best support our families and our children. And I think that would be the biggest impact, would be to have kind of an understanding of what we go through in order to be able to change and support us kind of in our daily life.
Mm-hmm. My last question is, like, how can we create an inclusive and, welcoming environment for people with disabilities? Because I know there's a lot of ableism and sort of a lot of stigma towards disability. So I'm wondering what your take is on that.
Yeah. So there's two layers here, and this also goes along with question 4, and I'll go in a little more depth. There's two layers, right? The parent layer, where we can think about the challenges our families face and that parents face daily, that other typical families take for granted, and kind of figure out how to make those easier, like going out to eat, going for walks, even have both parents, working parents in the home, being able to go to gym memberships and use their childcare when there's no childcare for our children right now. There's no full-time childcare for our children. So how can we get them consistent childcare so the parents can function, so we can give our families respite, so we can keep our parents from burning out? And so that's kind of the parent side, the layer of things. And then there's the child layer, and how can we adjust our therapies, and how can we make it fun for kids, and how can we make sure that we're accepting all communication is communication, and how can we respect our child's autonomy first, before reaching for the milestones, and how can that be reflected in our therapy practices, and the way we engage with our disabled children every day. And so I think, and not just providing therapy to our children, but also providing therapy to our parents and making them understand, it's not primarily about the milestones. They need to release those expectations and really, like reclaiming motherhood, understand how to keep perspective and what is important in parenting your child, as opposed to getting your child to become something that they may never become. And so we want to keep being supportive of our children, but we also, and try to move them forward to get them to function the best way possible. But we don't want that to take over their, as primary. We don't want that to be what defines our children, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It does. It really does.
Mhm.
Okay.